An update on the legal storm Donald Trump is facing. He has to counter the real possibility that senior officials at the Trump Organization or his company or himself all face the prospect of indictment. As we've reported, there's a special grand jury that is now reviewing evidence in New York. Trump has also been putting his D.C. hotel up for sale. That's one of the properties that has been under investigation and planning a series of summer rallies amidst what is mounting legal jeopardy in New York. Citizen Trump facing a serious test. Meanwhile, Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, well, he sees charges coming down the pike.
The chance that there's not going to be indictments coming out and there's not going to be convictions, it's kind of like me waking up tomorrow 7 feet tall and playing power forward for the Knicks. It's there, right? It's going to happen.
I'm joined now by Neil Katyal, former acting U.S. Solicitor General, and Andrew Kaufman. He was the Executive Assistant District Attorney and Chief of the Investigative Division in the Manhattan DA's office. Very relevant, given that that is the same office that has so much going on with Donald Trump's organization and legal exposure. Welcome to both of you. Adam, I wanted to start by just walking us through what does it mean when, as we've reported, you get a grand jury, a special, extensive one impaneled in this way. And what do you think of what we've heard from some of your former colleagues, some of whom have said, we don't know yet, we have to see, and others have said, well, Cy Vance doesn't make this move unless there are some indictments coming of someone?
Thanks, Ari. Excuse me. Thanks for having me on tonight. So it's true. The impaneling a special grand jury, it means a lot. It means that the prosecutors have spent the past year going through evidence, gathering documents, reviewing them, litigating, of course, over the tax records, talking to witnesses. And they've reached a point in this process where they feel there is enough evidence to present to a grand jury. A special grand jury in New York State is a grand jury that will sit for 6 months or longer, that will hear only one or two cases, and they'll focus, in this case, on the Trump investigation. So it really does have a significance in that it means that the district attorney is ready to move forward with witnesses, with strategy. They might compel witnesses to testify. They might charge people. They might immunize people. There's a lot of strategic moves that come that come with a special grand jury when you have the time to use the grand jury to develop the evidence and make the case.
What do you think about the question I asked over whether there will or won't be indictments?
You know, it seems likely that when you take the step of impaneling a special grand jury, that indictments will follow. We don't know who will be indicted, but the district attorney is not going to take the step of impaneling a special grand jury unless they believe, in their assessment, there's legally sufficient evidence to demonstrate criminal conduct. Now, you can't say who it is. You can't say, is it Mr. Trump, Donald Trump himself? Is it the Trump Organization? Is it executives, the kids? But you can say that they're looking at this and thinking, we've got enough to go forward and bring criminal charges.
Neil?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of that. So first of all, a grand jury is largely a black box. So we don't find out what the grand jury is thinking, what they're being presented with, and so on. I mean, the best way of thinking about it is kind of like the opposite of Donald Trump. With Donald Trump, it's always TMI. We know everything he's thinking or the lack thereof. With a grand jury, it's all about secrecy, as it should be. And so we're not going to hear much. But here's what we do know. We do know that this grand jury has been convened, that the grand jury is looking at the Trump Organization and individuals within it. And Donald Trump, of course, was the head of it for a time, and then it was passed on to his two sons when he was the president. I agree they could be looking just at the organization and not at the individuals. That might be true in some corporate cases, but unlikely here because this is a closely held company in which there's the direct accountability of the leaders. This is not like some big behemoth publicly traded company like this. We know that this investigation involves financial records, that they've gone and sought the CFOs, grandkids' schools, tax returns, and so on. And look, most normal companies have a legal compliance office that deals with all of this and makes sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, but not Trump. I mean, Trump might come to regret replacing a legal compliance office with like a big picture with a giant Sharpie of the presidential seal or something like that. But all of that is what the grand jury is going to be looking at. So their financial records, witnesses, a whole goldmine for prosecutors.
Yeah, and Adam, I want to play something that we've been talking to many witnesses and people with primary experience, just because that helps you understand the case better. Jack O'Donnell ran one of the biggest operations that they had back when the Trump Organization wasn't just sort of a marketing and branding operation, but they were involved in actual business buildings, the Atlantic City casinos. Take a listen to what he said.
And I actually went through, a situation where I was asked to literally build false financials for my business. I then went into Donald's office, and Donald said, "Did Robert and Harvey talk to you about the numbers?" And I said, "Yes, they did. But let me explain why I can't redo the numbers, because they won't be true." And he just said, "We need new numbers."
Adam, when you worked in the same Manhattan DA's office, would that kind of evidence, if it were recent enough, be something you could work with?
Yes. I mean, absolutely. When you have people who went in the room and spoke to Donald Trump and told Donald Trump, I mean, that example is in and of itself, if it were a timely example, that would be enough to sustain charges, at least for falsifying the records of the company. And if that is done in furtherance of some type of fraudulent conduct, it's a felony charge. So, that's why you have a grand jury, because you've got the documents. The documents say whatever they say. The numbers are recorded. The tax returns are filed. The valuations are submitted wherever they're submitted. Now the question is, who caused that to happen? And you need to have the witnesses to come in and say who was responsible, who did this, who authorized it, who commanded it.
And Adam, what do you say to a critique we've heard both from certain people that are sympathetic to Trump, but also from some big Trump critics who think he skated for too long, including in Democratic New York, that this guy was not exactly, to Neil's earlier point, flying below the radar. He was not exactly someone that you couldn't hear about in New York and hear about how many people he'd stiffed and how many times he'd inflated his assets and then undervalued them in other contexts. The tax stuff was legendary even before they got the full returns. What do you say to the critique that says that perhaps Mr. Vance or other officials up and down the line were asleep at the wheel if it's so bad that now it's going to merit charges?
I think, look, you look back, there's a lot of scuttlebutt that you hear people talking, oh, it was so obvious back then. I think there's a degree of 20/20 hindsight. I think it's telling that Cy Vance is not seeking re-election. So the decision that he's making, the decision he will make about whether to charge someone and who to charge if it's Donald Trump is really an apolitical decision that he'll make based on the facts of the case. He's got no sort of political game since he's not seeking re-election.
You're sort of veering away, like a good lawyer. You're sort of veering away from the question at hand, which is whether this office was somehow lenient then. I take your point that Mr. Vance certainly is not, by definition, auditioning for the next campaign. He doesn't have another campaign. But what about back then? I mean, Neil and I have discussed, viewers may remember, Trump Soho wasn't even in Soho. So you don't need to be an expert to go, is that real estate fraud or is that the tip of the iceberg? I give you the last word, Adam.
Well, the office looked at Trump Soho once before. The decision was made not to go forward with that case. I think that in the years since Donald Trump became president, a lot more information has come out, a lot more scrutiny has been paid to his business activities, and you reach a certain point where the quantum of evidence becomes so great that it's time to take action.